Hello, hello.
An audio check. How's the sound? Good. All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. This is a very important night. We have the pleasure tonight of swearing in Westminster's next fire chief, Derek Menard. To say before we begin the proceedings, and first and foremost, though, thank you all for coming. From your department, great to see a lot of familiar faces. They're very eager to have you be sworn in. So why don't I get started? Well, I am pleased to announce that Derek Menard has returned to Westminster to serve as our next chief of the Westminster Fire Department, beginning today. Some of you already know Chief Menard and his exceptional record of service. If you not know or have had the pleasure to work with Chief Menard, he's returning to Westminster after spending the past 3 years as the team of 338 personnel and managed 50. Chief Menard first joined the Westminster Fire Department in 1991, and over the next 24 years, he moved up the ranks from firefighter and paramedic to lieutenant in fire prevention and EMS chief. Chief Menard also played a role in developing the department's wildland team, which he led as captain. In 2015, Menard was promoted to deputy chief of operations. He held the second in command position until 2019 when he moved to Savannah. Well, we're very pleased to have Chief Menard return as our next fire chief. And I would now like to call on our city clerk, Abby Fitch, to swear you in, Chief.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I, Derek Menard, that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Colorado and the ordinances and city charter of the city of Westminster, and faithfully perform the duties of fire chief upon which I'm about to enter. Thank you. Aiden, would you please? It's my honor to hand you the badge. Derek, it's an honor to welcome you back home. We've missed you, but it's been much about all the great things you've done in Savannah, and all your stories, and this last month, and where you've been, and over lifetime. It's been beautiful. Thanks for the pictures. It's been great. So it's my honor to get to put his bugles on, and I asked the history of the bugles. Of the group, and so it's my honor to pin on with you.
Well, I wrote something out. I'm not known for being brief. I'm just being here tonight and actually seeing everybody in this room, I think Josh is best. I cannot express how grateful, honored, happy, elated that I am to be back in Westminster. This is home. This has been home. It's always been home. It's home. I raised last year, went to Westminster High School. I was in the military for 3 years, and I chose to come back to Westminster. I was hired on the Westminster Fire Department in 1991 and had 28 of the best years of my life here with many of you in this room and some I'm going to get to know well. My son Aiden got to pin the badge on tonight. What an honor. He has 2 older brothers, Nick and Austin, who live in LA and Phoenix, so they couldn't be with us tonight. But I know they're here in spirit. So, and it's just privileged to join the team of men and women who are with an outstanding sense of dedication, commitment, and passion for helping. These principles guide us in serving citizens, businesses, and visitors in our city. I will lead, serve, and provide the staff with our mission. Westminster Fire is among one of the nation's best. It's exhibited by the achievement of ISO Class 1 and CFAI accreditation. Only 114 departments out of nearly 30,000 hold both of those certifications. or accolades. So it's an honor to have that. Because it demonstrates the quality of service that the city provides to the community. Many people don't. It reflects on the outstanding effectiveness and resiliency of our city's water system. It also acknowledges the professionalism and efficiency of our emergency communications center, our dispatchers. These relationships help create a city that is progressive, innovative, and transparent. We invited two outside agencies to come in and evaluate the fire department and city services. And not every department's willing to do that. I will meet with fire department employees, city staff and management, as well as community leaders and organizations. My goal is to develop a collective mission and vision for the department. The shared input is a vital step to ensure the fire department is united and moving in a direction that meets the needs of the community and council. In the coming months, I will use this information to set priorities and strategically guide the department. I look forward to developing a strong relationship with the citizens of Westminster. It is vital to have a collaborative relationship with the residents and business groups. It is important that the community feels connected to the fire department and help set our objectives through our cooperative strategic planning process. I'm eager to work with all of you and accomplish our collective goals. Most importantly, I acknowledge the fact that Westminster personnel who are dedicated to the community that they serve. They, like all other incredible city staff, are focused on doing what is best for our community. Our mayor and city council are responsive to fire safety needs of our citizens. I'm proud to be back with this team. I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
So that closes the this portion of the evening, and to welcome Chief Menard to his new role. We're all very happy to have him back, and he begins his new role with us tomorrow morning. So thank you, Chief, and we will now transition into the boardroom beginning of our study session tonight. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Welcome, everyone. Reports from city councilors. Councilor Sadi.
Yes, so I met with about 18 residents from Knox Court. They gave me a tour of the impacted homes around the explosion, and it's heartbreaking, it's sad. I would like to request an update of what we talked about last week, and if we can have maybe daily, I would like updates, even if nothing has occurred. I just want to know what's happening. So, not sure if you have an update.
It's on our agenda.
Okay. But more frequent updates would be my request.
No, just got back from vacation.
Councilor Mayor Jim.
No, nothing.
Councilor Emmons.
Last week, there was a historic landmark board meeting. I was not able to attend as we were preoccupied with city manager search. So I've reached out to staff for minutes. So as soon as I get those, I will update council on that meeting. Other than that, nothing.
Councilor Seymour.
I was not there, but special permits and licensing had a special meeting on Friday evening, the 29th. And it was our first common consumption area was approved for the orchard. So they've already got it up on their website and they're already advertising it. And I know a couple businesses that I've been up there recently were extremely excited for that. So number one is on the roll. So that was the major news from last week.
We have a budget meeting on Saturday from 8 to 2 at the Mac. And that evening at 7, we have, we're not having town halls during the summer, but we'll have a pop-up tent and counselors that can be there will be there to talk with any community members at Big Dry Creek at 128th. And I don't know the name of the street that goes in there. It's between Huron and Zuni. On the south side of the street, and it'll be movie in the park, and I think it's Adam's Family 2 or something like that. So should be fun. And update on city manager search after this study session. We have executive session to continue discussions. Interim city manager Andrews, do you have anything?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem City Councilors. I would turn straight to item 1 on our agenda, if that pleases you, and ask Eric Otzelberger, our Operations and Community Preservation Manager, to provide an update on 7731 Knox Court. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Mayor. A lot of conversations have transpired since last week, and I'll just start off with your actions last Monday were recognized by our partners at the state as somewhat unprecedented for local governments, and unprecedented in a good way, as far as I just wanted to convey sort of the appreciation and respect from some of our intergovernmental colleagues for the bold action in the amendment to the carryover appropriation that was taken. So I will try to be brief here, but of course we'll be open to questions. As recently as this morning, I talked with legal counsel for Reverse Mortgage LLC, who was involved with this with the reverse mortgage. They and HUD, the federal government, Department of Housing and Urban Development, are walking away. So they are going to release, each of them has a respective deed of trust that is involved with the reverse mortgage. Of course, the lender has one, but HUD's role in insuring or backing reverse mortgages, if you will, kind of as just a technical item, they both have deeds of trust. As of August 15th is the date. They will release those deeds of trust. They will no longer have any interest or responsibility with these properties or this property. So where that leaves us, and what I asked legal counsel this morning is, I think as I shared last week, their asset management firm, Five Brothers Asset Management, has gone through a procurement process. They had competitive bids. They awarded a bid. Both the contractor and subcontractor are in excellent standing with CDPHE. We're engaged in conversations to see if there's some sort of relationship that could be possible between the city and Five Brothers, or a direct relationship between the city and that contractor and subcontractor. It's, I think, important for city council and the community to understand, in addition to the permit that's required from the state of Colorado for the asbestos work itself, there's also an element to this which is called an open air variance. And as you may be familiar with other, let's take the Pizza Hut on Sheridan. You notice how they tented the debris in the structure, and they do negative pressure there to contain the asbestos. Well, we're talking about major spill on a whole residential lot here. There's a subcontractor that has expertise. They've been successful in safely performing this open air abatement. So we're exploring that potential relationship. Also, we do have a counter bid from another unsolicited counter bid from another contractor that has done work in the neighborhood, and that's another potential path. So at this point, we're at a juncture as far as where the city will engage with awarding the contract. But I think, you know, where we were coming to you previously last week was this interest in a voluntary cooperative agreement with Reverse Mortgage LLC, you know, using some of the insurance proceeds to couple with city funds to partner on this remediation. That is no longer in play with their decision to essentially cut their losses. It is also important to note, in this multi-layered complex situation, Reverse Mortgage LLC technically never filed for foreclosure. The foreclosure that's active on there is related to this Ken McFarland Properties. That's essentially a $6,000 lien that occurred in 2015. However, the same cloud of magnitude of cost with the remediation that's hanging over this property would apply to those foreclosure proceedings. So Dave Frankel and his team, you know, we met this morning to talk. You know, they provided excellent legal counsel, talked through a few legal considerations as we proceed. But I think we have more clarity today as far as, I guess the good news is there are less parties that will be involved with the ultimate resolution here. And we have two paths related to, you know, of course, this would be a city council decision on a sole source award. If the interest is expediency, you know, we have a competitive process. Granted, it's been conducted by a third party. And then we also have the option of, if we want to take a different approach, awarding a sole source contract with another contractor. So we're with the low bidder with Five Brothers. We're working to obtain the details of their bid. And of course, time is not a luxury we have. So we've made it abundantly clear to them, if there's a partnership opportunity here, we need them to be responsive quickly. If not, we're going to have to exercise our other option at this juncture that we're at.
Does the unsolicited bid of from the contractor who's done work in the neighborhood, do they have experience with open air abatement?
No. And that's part of the complication. While they are in good standing, they're licensed with CDPHE, they have not engaged in this. And their proposal reflects a full containment. And not to get into technical details, our partners, our intergovernmental partners, have, you know, not saying it's impossible, but have expressed some concern about effectively executing this project in a safe manner.
What are the costs of both proposals?
The
One is 310, right?
one is 315. The other is 309,000 and change. So not much difference between the two. And I think it's important to note, like a lot of industries, the asbestos contractors themselves are suffering from a lack of certified employees to do this work. And over the last several years, there's been an erosion of sorts in the number of licensed asbestos contractors with the state. So I know the numbers we were talking about last week were a bit shocking, related to the magnitude of these costs. But I think as this unsolicited bid shows, that's where the market is at.
Have you confirmed with the original bidder that he's going to stick to that?
No. So, Councilor Zadi, quite some time ago, we asked in confidence for the details of their bid and to have a discussion with them. They declined to do that. I think understandably so, from the standpoint of a concern that perhaps we were going to exercise certain legal authority we had, maybe, just to be colloquial, undercut them and kind of take the job away. Now that things have changed, and that's where we have various attorneys providing counsel to their clients to get this contractor, their subcontractor, and Five Brothers to the table with us. But once again, I think as you've all made abundantly clear, we don't have a lot of time to wait for their response. So, we're hoping, because it was literally right before noon today that I concluded with their legal counsel. So a lot is happening in a short period of time. And of course, we've made it clear to them that your collective expectation is quick progress.
So quick being of the essence, are you looking for council approval as in our council meeting next Monday? Or are you looking for like special session? Like what is that quick mean?
If the stars align here, they're interim city manager Jody Andrews and team, we talked about the potential of August 22nd if the stars align. There's still the permitting that technically needs to be done with CDPHE, but either as part of the scope of service, either contractor would do that. And once again, both are licensed, they're in good standing with the state. It's just one has a subcontractor that has this specialty and the wherewithal to do this open air variance, another does not.
So that's helpful because 22 days doesn't seem quick right? That's more than 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks. But it's helpful to understand that there's still processes that need to happen, such as permitting, prior to us formally making a decision. So that's helpful. So thank you.
What's the typical timeline for the permitting process on average?
Like a lot of things, it depends on the quality of the submission. However, with this case and with the deep involvement CDPHE has had with other neighboring properties that have successfully completed their abatement, they're standing ready to expedite the permit. And if, with this juncture, if there's an opportunity to have a relationship with the original low bid contractor and their sub, they more or less have things ready to go. The other unsolicited proposal would have to prepare an application. However, they're versed in that. So the goal would be to basically have that could be done concurrently while the parties would be working on an action for your consideration with sole source. So I guess the goal would be by the end of the month to have all those administrative items lined up.
Would it help to know if council with this particular situation has a problem with sole source so that we can get on with things?
Yes.
No problem.
Oh, sorry.
Mayor, could I also add, Mr. Otzelberger and the team are working really hard on this. And if we can bring it in sooner than that, we will. But we wanted to set realistic expectations based on prior experience with the state and such, and especially on this case. But they are working as hard as they can to bring it in faster.
That's obvious. And I just thought it just would help if we're not going to add more red tape to having headache over sole source or not. Get the right people that can do it and let's get it done. Mayor Pro Tem.
I know last week when we approved this, we asked for weekly updates, but one of the other things we asked about is how we were communicating this to the community. And I know that you guys have been working hard on this last week, and I appreciate it. What avenue will you be using to make sure that the community knows kind of where things are and what steps so that they understand the progress being made?
Mayor Pro Tem DeMott, Kit Redmer, our council outreach coordinator, has been providing regular updates, and he, I mean, to my knowledge, I know he was preparing one at the end of last week. So, he's been on a weekly cadence, if you will, and I mean that this is following up from the neighborhood meeting that was held at the MAC back on April 20th that had a distribution list of many residents, and Brenda Garcia has been an excellent advocate for the neighborhood. And I think she's taken it upon herself to, if there are certain folks missing on that distribution list, forward that along. So we're open to other requests.
I think that's great. I saw some heads nodding in the back. So I just want to make sure that they hear the progress that we're hearing so that that neighborhood understands. We weren't just given lip service last week. We want to make sure this gets done and that they understand all the hard work your team is doing.
Can I request more frequent updates? Because the 18 folks I talked to on Saturday said you're not hearing enough from the city. So maybe weekly might not be the right cadence, especially if this is going to be a few weeks away. Weekly would be 2 more updates. And they've been on this for, it's been over 160 days. So more frequent wouldn't hurt us, and we should do what we can.
I just don't know what you're going to hear more on a daily cadence. I mean, we're hearing how long this is going to take. Some of this is permitting and stuff. I don't want to bog staff up in daily updates where they're telling us the same thing every day. I guess to accommodate that, if something new happens before the week's up, then, by all means, it would be great to hear there's a meaningful development, in my opinion. But otherwise, I just don't want to spend staff time to communicate the same thing. I'm sure that would get frustrating to the community too, to hear the same thing.
I found that over communication it's never frustrating, especially when, they're angry at the city and it's not our fault. So I think one way of healing that is over communicate. That doesn't hurt. It only helps.
But if they're not receiving it now, then how do you propose that they receive it? Right? I get so many emails, sometimes they fly by, right? So it's on the onus is on me also to participate in keeping up to date. So if it's weekly, what do you propose as far as, I also agree, I don't feel like bogging down staff to get us a fast and expedient process by August 22nd. That's a pretty hefty timeline as far as permitting, as far as getting things in line. And just last week, this wasn't on council's radar or even on staff's radar to get the funding to move this forward. So now they're pivoting to rush by August 22nd, that's their deadline, to try and make this happen. So I don't want to, not that we shouldn't communicate, but I feel like the priority is I would like their focus on getting it done, and also with a cadence of weekly to say, here's our update. If, like Mayor Pro Tem said, if there's something sooner that says, hey, we got a permit, we're gonna go. I think that lends a communication saying, we got it sooner than we thought. Now, let's say that's the entities that we have to work with are stalemating us, that are stalling us. That's also probably worth a email update or a communication update. Says we're not going to be able to meet August 22nd because XYZ. So I think that there's a cadence to it, but also I don't disagree. Sometimes over communication is good, but it can bombard people where they're actually missing things. So that's my concern.
Well, I agree with the milestones, that there's going to be a lot of milestones in these 3 weeks. every milestone, they should get an update. I just don't want Kit, for example, to think it's, okay, he'll, stack up the wins and then send it out once a week because of the weekly cadence. So I agree that as long as things are happening, when things happen, they should send out the update. It's 5 minutes to write an email.
And I'd rather have, since Kit has been the pulse, sounds like he's been kind of on the pulse of what's happening. I'd like to understand maybe from him of, it's a simple email saying, would you, is this cadence correct? Are you getting our updates? Do you understand what's happening? Like that, I think that's part of the communication that he's doing.
Jody, you've got what's being discussed. You'll talk with Kit and
Yes, we'll follow up with Kit. He's listening tonight as well, and we'll do minimum weekly communication. As we've committed, we'll report in City Council on a weekly basis. In addition, any breaking news or change in status, we'll also communicate that if we have a breakthrough or such. We'll also follow up, make sure that we have our community contacts up to date and that we're making sure that they're getting the information from us as we release it. And we'll work post haste to get to resolution quickly.
anything else? Thank you so much. We know you pivoted well, and thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
City revenue presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to ask Mr. Chris Lindsay, Assistant City Manager, to come to the table. We have two presentations for you as part of this tonight. An outside presentation, which we will begin with. Mr. Lindsay will introduce our outside partners, and then we will follow that up with a brief staff presentation, then take any questions or discussions from City Council. So I'll turn it over to Chris Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and councilors. We're here this evening to provide council and the public an update on revenue forecasting work in the lead up to our budget retreat this Saturday. This work that we have been doing started during COVID when the city first contracted with the lead school at the University of Colorado. Through this work, they have proven to be strong partners and solid forecasters. This evening, staff is looking from council to provide guidance on our revenue projections and to provide guidance on our general wage increases. We're going to start this evening with an update from our distinguished guests and then transition to staff for those requests from guidance. With that, let me give some brief introductions. First off, let me introduce Brian Lewandowski. He's the Executive Director of the Business Research Division at the Lead School of Business at the University of Colorado. He has 15 years of experience doing economic studies at CU Boulder. Professor Robert McNown is a professor of economics who holds a PhD from the University of California, San Diego, and specializes in econometrics, time series analysis, and forecasting. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Richard Wabakund. He's the Associate Dean for Business and Government Relations. He's the Senior Economist and Faculty Director at the Business Research Division and at the University of Colorado Boulder. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, thank you, City Council, for having us here this evening. And I also want to thank staff for all of the hard work that they do in helping us help you with the revenue forecast. Will you please advance the slide? So this provides a brief overview of what we're doing and why we're doing it. The purpose is to really provide an econometrically derived tax forecast. And what that means is we're taking a look at national economic variables and Colorado economic variables and local area economic variables and tax variables. And we're trying to find statistical relationships between these so that as the national economy changes, we can see what our expectations are for the local economy and for your tax revenue. So the way that we do this is we do collect a lot of data from from staff about the local economy and tax revenues. And then we have a national model that we license from Moody's Analytics, and we share that license with the Office of State Planning and Budgeting, Colorado Legislative Council, the State Demography Office, CDOT, and others. So we're all using that as sort of a base foundation. But Moody's provides a baseline economic forecast, so what they consider the most likely pathway for the economy. And then they have a range of more optimistic and more pessimistic scenarios for us to choose from. So as a team, we get together and talk about what we think the most likely path is for the economy. And we model your tax revenue based on those expectations for the nation and with our model for Colorado. And then in the model, we also produce a more optimistic scenario and more pessimistic scenario. So you can see what the revenue would look like under alternative economic conditions. And we update this 2 times a year. And we actually just updated the model about a week and a half ago to take into account the rapidly changing economic environment that we're in. So when we ran it last time, it was March. And in March, we were dealing with data through year end 2021. And the world is a little bit different now. So we remodeled, we chose a more pessimistic economic scenario, which Robert will share with you in a few moments. But first, we're going to hear from Rich, who will provide the economic forecast, sort of these economic conditions that we're looking at right now as we do the forecast. Rich?
Next slide, please. So to sort of build on what you just heard from Brian, national sort of top down, and then we talk a lot about the state and the state drivers as well. And so my job is to sort of set up the national and state relationships and retail sales relationships before I pass it on to Robert to talk about the specifics of the model and the specifics of the local forecast. And in this context, of course, we just came out with the second quarter GDP, second quarter GDP, which was also negative. This, of course, sets off people saying that we're in a recession, even though technically I would argue we're not in a recession. And it's a very confounding situation one more time. We've had so many of them since COVID struck. But in this particular case, we have many of the variables that are actually used to dictate when a recession starts still rising at a fairly good clip, including employment, personal income, consumption, and also very importantly, the ISM index, the Institute for Supply Management's manufacturing index. We see lots of parts of the economy still growing at a pretty strong rate, even though you're getting somewhat anomalous readings with GDP being slightly negative 2 quarters in a row. Next slide, please. So one thing, of course, that's been very dramatic has been the recovery in employment, kind of a check-shaped recovery. I called it a swoosh originally, and someone accused me of product endorsement. So we're calling a check-shaped recovery here. And you can see we're down about 500,000 jobs still, but a pretty remarkable recovery. And you can see that even in more detail on the next slide, where you can see how the different recessions, next slide, please. Thank you. So you can see how the different recessions, how rapidly the recoveries have occurred. And of course, this one, which is in red at the very beginning, by far the steepest and deepest of the recessions, you can see as we're bouncing back, we're down, a little bit less than 0.4%, 0.34% at this particular point in time. With the last recession, the Great Recession, we were just bottoming out at this point in terms of the recovery. So the recovery in employment has been rather dramatic. Yes, it's amazing what 3 stimulus bills can possibly do to an economy in more ways than one. But we did get employment recovery out of this in the process. More about that later if we want to have more discussion. Next slide, please. So Colorado has fared pretty well in this. We haven't been a top 10 state that we were used to being, but we're pretty consistently in the sort of 11 to 15 range. The states on this particular map may be a little hard to see, but the ones in dark brown are the states that have had the largest amount of employment growth from the recession, the change from the recession, pre-recession peak. So you can see our neighbors to the west, for example, Utah, one of the strongest growth, Idaho, Montana, and Texas. But then the tan states, and the next wave of states in terms of having the strongest growth from, again, the pre-recession peak. And you can see Colorado is one of those states. We were like the 11th or 12th state back. We continue to be in sort of that position in terms of employment growth. So relatively outperforming. I don't have all the details on all these slides in here, and you'll say thank you when I'm done for not doing that. But I will say this, it is somewhat amazing in a state that has such a large tourism sector. That's a pretty heavy weight in terms of the recovery. So rest of the state economy has really been growing at a pretty strong pitch to bring the state into higher levels of employment and again, a top 10 to 15 ranking in terms of employment growth. Next slide, please. So, of course, all good things must come to an end. And this is the federal funds rate outlook. It's something that is referred to as the dot plot. And this shows you, I guess I could say it's being broadcast and probably being recorded too. But this shows you how wrong the Federal Reserve can be on one simple graph. So back in the dark, in September 2021, the tan dots that are all the way at the bottom, this is where they thought interest rates were going to go back at the September meeting last year. Then in December, the reality of the inflation being a little bit more persistent was setting in, not as transitory as they had hoped. And you can see the black dots were the next, what they said in December about interest rates. Then you go to green and you can see in March what they said as the reality of really much more sustained inflation and higher inflation over a longer period of time. And then the most recent meeting last month, well, the June meeting, you can see in the red what they have come out with. And so you can see why each time they're announcing these, where they think interest rates are going to be, we get these continued discussions in the newspaper. And of course, we saw a 75 basis point hike last week. And the question is, what is the next one going to be? There's conjecture we're going to see 75 more basis points at their next meeting. But this is giving you a sense of how much they've revised and the kind of financial environment we're dealing with. Next slide, please. So why is this? Well, it's because inflation that they thought was going to be relatively transitory, as they said originally, has become more entrenched. And I don't think it's 100% certain that they believe that it's going to be sustained. But what they got really nervous about is there's a lot of surveys of consumers that are out there. And consumers were signaling earlier in the year that they anticipated inflation to be going even higher. And when you have people anticipating higher inflation, it sort of builds in as a so-called wage price spiral. And they got very nervous when they saw the general public saying, oh, this inflation's staying, it's going to go higher, it's going to go higher. And they knew they had to act fairly severely and quickly to take that inflation expectation down. And in fact, the last 2 months of surveys, the inflation expectations have been declining. It does seem that the higher interest rates have had an influence on consumers' view of the sustained nature of inflation, meaning it would be less sustained and start to crest and come back down again. You can also see, you have copies of these slides so that we've shared. So if you care to go back and look at this at all, you can see that the mountain region that we're part of in this data has a higher rate than the nation as a whole. Denver Aurora, the Colorado, Denver Aurora Lakewood numbers, the Colorado numbers are a little less than the Rocky Mountain region numbers. But nonetheless, the Rocky Mountain region is the highest inflation rates in the country. And when asked about that, I was interviewed about this, and someone said, well, so why is this? I said, because we're the hottest region in the country. We have the fastest growing economies. We have the really hot housing markets. When you look at Idaho and Utah and all these different states that I showed you a little bit earlier. So it doesn't surprise me that we have this higher inflation rate in the Rocky Mountain region, but we need this thing to calm down. And I think it will be calming down, with energy prices and so on. Next slide, please. So this is just gives you sort of a bearing of where we are as Colorado and 1 year numbers of where we are in terms of our ranking. And you can see 15th in real GDP growth, 14th in employment growth. Population growth, we've slipped to 17th. And this is an interesting number. The state demographer, Elizabeth Garner and her office would tell you sort of similar things. We've seen a slowdown in migration into the state. We've also seen a slowdown in what we call the natural rate of growth, births versus deaths. So we've had relatively low birth rates, may have been driven by COVID. It's not 100% certain. We'll see if they go back to higher rates as COVID, wanes. But we certainly, of course, also saw higher death rates. So the combination of those has dampened the natural rate of increase, but also we have a slower flow or in-migration. So part of what drives our economic model, and especially our long-term economic models, is the rate of population growth as well. You can see all the way down, you probably don't believe this, but we're 14th in as a state in terms of housing appreciation, one being the most expensive. Everybody who lives here thinks we're in the #1 state for housing price appreciation, but there are actually 13 other states that housing prices are appreciating even more rapidly than they are in Colorado right now. Next slide, please.
Can you explain what LFPR is?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's a good one. Thank you. Can we go back one slide, please? So LFPR is gobbledygook initials, but it stands for Labor Force Participation Rate. And one of the reasons Colorado has done well in this recovery is we've continued to have people return to the workforce at a much more rapid rate than they have in other parts of the country. So 51 entities, including the District of Columbia, Colorado has the second highest labor force participation rate in the country for the past year. So very strong, I would say very strong work ethic, but very strong labor force participation, which is a great thing for the economy. And thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So in closing sort of this piece with the next couple of slides, we had this incredible phenomenon, and you experienced it as well, but this is the national data. And we were on this kind of trend line. You see the red line overlapping the tan, which is the actuals. And then you can see the tan line get really crazy with COVID shutdown and so on. But, we're thinking eventually we go back to that sort of trend line. But we had this incredible jump up, and you can see this incredible sort of rate of growth. You can see the numbers on there, but 20.4% from the prior, 29.4% from the prior peak, but 8.4% year over year. And we've been sort of batting this around. Are we going to see this new green line and a whole new line that's sort of parallel? We certainly didn't think we could continue on this crazy new upward slope. And this is what you're experiencing, and frankly, what's filtering back into the revenue forecast. We had this incredible surge in retail sales, statewide and locally and nationally. And now we're starting to see some tempering of that as all of the excess money that was sitting out there from the stimulus checks is getting spent, as employment growth is a little bit slower, as people are being a little bit more cautious, and of course, inflation eating away at sort of some spending power. The combination of all of those things is really creating this sort of question going forward of where is the trend line going to be, or where is the new pattern going to be as we go forward. So we had this incredible jump up for a year. Where does it go from there? And that's part of the challenge that my colleagues have in forecasting this particular environment. Next slide, please. So one of the things we have focused on, of course, this shows you the state sales tax collections, and year over year, they're down to 14.2%. But this varies by area, as we'll show you in just a moment, depending on the industry composition, whether tourism, the commuting, the retail mix that an area has, retail mix relative to big boxes versus Main Street retail and so on, the different levels of population growth that certain areas have seen, and the levels of economic development. And without going off into the weeds or saying how lucky we are that we have business, we're doing these kinds of forecasts for a number of entities. And these variables really are quite a bit different entity to entity in terms of how great the population, how fast the population is growing, or what their retail mix like, and so on. So it really gives us some great comparison points when we sort of banty this around and talk about it with staff, but with ourselves as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we look at, and we're talking to staff about this, is the inflow and outflow on a daily commuting basis. So this is the Westminster numbers, and the people who 46,000 or so people coming into work. You have 55,500 going out of Westminster to work. And you have about 6,287 that are live and work in Westminster. I don't think that's a particularly unusual pattern for a city that's sitting in the middle of a metro area. But you can sort of see the people coming in, we generally think of as spending money during the day, and the people going out are spending money someplace else during the day. So we kind of think about that when we think about sort of the retail sales picture piece of this. And I think this is my last slide coming up, please. Next slide. Oh, great. Perfect. So when I was saying about different areas having different sort of, retail sales success, if you will, this shows you from the end of 2019, the entire year of 2019, and then the entire year of 2021. So 2 years of retail sales growth. You can see on the far left, Teller County had over 40% retail sales growth in that 2-year period. And if you go all the way down to the right, I'll tell you something that you've observed yourself. That's the city and county of Denver. And it's up about 3% over 2 years. So you see the people not going and working in downtown as much. You see the tourism down significantly and hotel occupancy and all of those things. And you can see sort of the evolution of the sales tax revenues. And then I think highlighted there, we have the counties that Westminster is straddling. Or parts of. So you can see the relative position of Jefferson County and Adams County. So hopefully that's a little bit of background. I'd be happy to answer questions in a little bit, but at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague, Robert, and have him talk about the City of Westminster forecast.
Quick question for this. You said this is a full year of 2019 and a full year of 2020?
21. Full year of 2021 and the full year of 2019. So the 2-year difference basically.
So not counting 2020.
No, counting 2020.
So we compared 2021 to the full year of 2019 to compare it to the last normal year, like a pre-COVID year. And 2020 was an anomaly that really wrecked a lot of sales taxes in the first part of the year. So we really wanted to show how communities recovered for full year of 2021 and compare it back to that last normal year.
Okay, that's fair. It's just confusing when you say 2 full years when it's 2019 to 2021. That's 3 years. And it's, if that makes sense.
Okay, yes. So what I was trying to say, it was the full year of data. It wasn't December of 19 and December of 21. It was the entire year of 19 and the entire year of 2021.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Didn't mean to confuse. Next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. The next slide, please. So my task is to lead you a little through our model and our process. And as Brian mentioned, we access a large set of data from a number of sources, including the city of Westminster. In this case, national data, particularly from Moody's. As Brian mentioned, Moody's provides us with national forecasts that help drive our Colorado economy forecast, as you see on the left schematic there. And that in turn helps drive the economy of the city of Westminster and the use in sales tax revenues and property tax revenues as well. Another thing to take away from one of Rich's slides was that the Colorado economy is not fully determined by what's going on in the national economy, that there's a lot of variation across the states. And so, although what's happening at the national level helps inform us through our statistical model as to what to expect for Colorado, it's not just a simple mapping from the national to the state economy. Brian also mentioned that we decided in the current projections to use one of Moody's somewhat more pessimistic scenarios for the national economy. We felt that was the most realistic thing, given Moody's was lagging a bit in updating their scenarios, and we felt that the way the economy was weakening in the last couple of months, that we'd be best off advising you on the basis of a somewhat more pessimistic scenario. which as Moody's would describe, there's a 75% probability, according to them, that the economy will prove to be better than what the scenario says, as opposed to the 50% probability in their baseline case. Let's go to the next slide, please. And, we've got an overwhelming amount of numbers to throw at you, so we're just trying to highlight a few of these. So this is a summary of the U.S. economy in the scenario that we've selected. And so you can see that, well, I'll just highlight a few of the numbers here, that the growth in personal income in both 22 and the current year and in 2023, certainly more than wiped out by inflation. And even though the inflation figure here, you see on the left column there at, I think that's about 7.7%, is lower than what we're projecting for the current year for Colorado. And notice that I list here also some of the specific drivers of the particular sectors in the economy that we model, because although we're just trying to forecast total sales tax revenues, given the way the different sectors of the economy performed over the pandemic, we found it was necessary to pull these different sectors apart and model them separately. And so thanks to Moody's, we're able to harness their projections at the national level, relate them to similar sectors in Colorado, and then use that to drive the different components of sales tax revenues and use tax revenues as well.
That's a quick question on that.
Yes, sure.
So I'm just looking at like this graph, and so like I take that as, say, food and beverage is up 7.6% year over year. And where do you get that figure from? That's what I'm not following, because I mean, I went to the grocery store on a particular item, say coffee. It's went up $4 from $20.99 to $24.99, same brand over the last 4 months. So I'm just trying to understand like what that is compared to what I actually see happening in the city.
Yeah, well, it could be that the overall rate of price increase for food and beverages for the nation as a whole is lower than it is here in Colorado, or in particular in the metro area. So we'll see some similar numbers for the state, and then also in terms of what to expect in terms of that component of revenues.
Okay, great.
Robert, can I interject for just a moment?
Sure.
Yeah. Back on slide 8, there's a table there that you can reference later if you want to, but on the far right side of that table, it shows the item weights for the consumer price index. And food and beverages only represent about 14% of the CPI. And food and beverages have, that overall basket of goods that we buy has gone up about 10% year over year. So some of that basket, which represents things like housing and apparel and transportation and medical costs and recreation, there's a lot of things in the overall basket of goods and services that food and beverage is just 1/6 of that basket.
And that number is averaging the whole U.S. though.
That's averaging the whole U.S. And then when we look at the area, it's up 9.4 year over year as of May. Mountain region and the U.S. are up 10% year over year as of June. The Denver area lags a little bit in the reporting. And then what we're showing here is the overall projection from Moody's for the full year. So if there's this if prices were a little bit lower in January and February, they ramped up to over 9% overall in May and June. And if we're starting to see that cresting right now.
That's what I'm curious about, because you're saying that through June. So like, and this is just fresh because I just went to the grocery store and did my every 2 week shopping. I was super shocked between this month and last month. I'm a very consistent human being, so it's the same stuff we buy. I was shocked by how much it's jumped in the last 30 days. So,
Noted.
but I mean, if you're saying that it kind of crested, that could be like, if the prediction is right, it crests in July and they anticipate it going down.
Yeah, and I think, one number that's sort of present probably to most of us is when you buy gasoline. It peaked at $5 a gallon in Colorado, and now in this area, it's down to about $4 so a gallon. So that's a pretty large percentage decrease now in about 25 days.
That makes sense. And then it takes time for that to hit the rest of the market.
Yeah. And that's just one of the many.
But to elaborate on
Yeah.
that, so the Russian-Ukraine thing is an unknown in terms of grains and some of the commodity stuff that's out there. Everybody was sort of conjecturing that food was going to sort of tail down, especially meat and chicken and so on. Most of that is projected to have much slower growth the second half of the year. But this sort of grain issues are now making people, I don't know, second guess some of their forecasts.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify what we're looking at on this table though? Is this, because it's like these are, for each column, like you have consumer price index, or consumer price growth, but then you also have like unemployment rate, employment rate. So what are the columns for restaurants, food and beverage stores, and e-commerce? Those I think of as, or I'm interpreting those as sales.
That's right. That's right.
Growth rate of sales.
Rate of sales.
So the only one that's
Not inflation.
No, but it would include the price increases, the fact that you're paying higher prices at the restaurant. And then on top of that, there's a growing volume of customers too. And so that's, of course, what will drive the corresponding revenue component for Westminster.
Maybe you can elaborate on what your comment was. So if you look at the restaurant column and go 2 lines up, during the pandemic, minus 15.7, and now it's 17.1. There's been great volatility in the individual components. Go to the far right column, you've got e-commerce up over 40% during the pandemic, and then now it's a 2.3% forecast for the year in terms of its growth. So breaking those into the individual components, which we're doing, has made a huge difference just because the series have been so volatile.
Yeah. Thanks for those questions. Let's go to the next slide, please. And this is similar information for the state of Colorado. Not so much detail on individual retail sales, but rather overall retail sales in the second column over. And there you can see what I was mentioning before, that consumer price index, and Rich hinted at this too. Overall inflation's been a little bit higher in Colorado than it is for the nation as a whole. This includes both the data to date as well as our projection over the rest of the year. And then in 2023, you can see that there's considerable weakness that's projected here. And my interpretation of this as the model has processed the statistical data is that a lot of the dislocations that we're experiencing currently in this year are really coming home to roost in 2023. And all of the economic conditions are weaker in 2023. And that's going to be the case for revenues as well, as we'll see in the next slide. So here are the various components of sales tax revenues, and then the total sales tax revenue about 2/3 of the way across from left to right. And then the 3 columns that represent use tax collections. And finally, sales and use tax in the last column. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So you can see that in the current year, you're maintaining a pretty robust rate of growth in sales tax revenues and total sales and use tax revenues, around close to 7%. But keep in mind, that's being more than wiped out by the increase in prices. And so if, for example, in your budget planning, if the basket of goods and services that you purchase, if the city of Westminster purchases is similar to the typical household, that means you're losing ground in terms of what you're really able to buy. And you, yes, please.
I'm just curious, is this national
No, this,
or is this Colorado?
so this particular chart now is just our revenue,
Just
Westminster revenues.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I was comparing the revenue growth then with the rate of increase in prices. And so City of Westminster will be falling behind, we'd say, in real terms. Another thing that you could use this kind of information for, I know there was a question or a hint of discussion about wage setting. And that's another thing that you could target is what is the overall rate inflation? How much do wages have to go up just so that workers are only standing still? And at this point, average wages across the economy, whether it's for the US or Colorado, are falling behind the rate of inflation considerably. So it's a tough time for workers. And they really feel it as you felt it going to the supermarket. Yeah.
Are non-store retailers e-commerce?
That's exactly right. And so a piece of jargon there. So I hope that the city of Westminster is able to take advantage of the what do we call it? Oh, the marketplace facilitator ordinance to collect taxes that Amazon, for example, might collect from third-party merchants, because I know that's a real boon to cities and their ability to collect those taxes. Let's go to the next slide. So here is the short-term sales and use tax forecast. So going out 2 years on a quarterly basis. And you can see in the middle there, the blue line, I'll talk about these different scenarios on the next slide too. The blue line is our baseline projection. And you can see that from this point forward, abstract from the seasonal variation that you see there in the collections, that there's really no net gain by the end of 2023. And that's due to the fairly weak economy that we're projecting for 2023, 2022 being quite a bit stronger in terms of this recovery. And the next slide would be my final slide, for the most final substantive slide. So as Brian mentioned, Moody's provides us with the possibility of selecting a number of alternative scenarios that they generate. And that's what lies behind the three lines in the middle there, the optimistic, the baseline, and the pessimistic scenarios. And the baseline, of course, is the one we focused on, is what we think is the most likely outcome. And then those are all banded on the outside by a high forecast and a low forecast. And those are statistically based confidence bounds, meaning that there's a 33% probability that the actual outcome could be higher than the high forecast or lower than the low forecast. So it gives you quite a range of possibilities to keep in mind in your planning. One thing that's somewhat encouraging is that even the low forecast, the lowest dashed line at the end of 2023 is still about the same as it is at the end of 2021. So, that's kind of a worst case scenario, I would say, and you're still not going to be in terrible shape, but keep in mind, this is in nominal dollars. It doesn't adjust for inflation. So in that sense, you would be falling behind. Next slide. So I just want to emphasize the principles that lie behind our forecasting exercise. We want to provide model-based, statistically based forecasts. We don't adjust the forecast on the basis of sort of after the fact second guessing, sometimes done through what are called add factors. But the forecasts are based on a model which is theoretically sound and meets several important statistical criterion. And finally, we don't have a particular axe to grind. We're not trying to sell optimistic or pessimistic forecasts. We just want to provide you with the information that we feel comes the closest to what you can expect to happen over the coming years. And finally, next slide. We'll be happy to take any further questions that you have.
Councilor Baker?
You said on this chart, you're not adjusting for inflation?
That's right. So if the revenues, like under the low scenario, remain flat,
well, let's just go with the blue line, the baseline.
Okay, yeah.
That's not adjusted for
So
inflation.
that includes inflation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So all of your tax revenue is in nominal terms or unadjusted terms, and so that's what we forecast out in as the nominal collections.
Right, which would be inflation. Because unless we open another huge mall, we're not going to be selling more stuff. Just the stuff we sell will be about the same, but it'll cost more, so we get more collections.
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right.
Anyone else? Councilor Mel?
I just jotted questions down as you were going. So kind of starting towards the earlier part of your presentation. You had mentioned that just overall as employment and incomes. Okay, sorry that you already answered that one, sorry. I kind of was curious to understand a little bit about the, you had compared the different recessions on slide 5. And I was just curious to know, I mean, it looks like in the 70s and the 80s, the recovery was kind of at a similar slope/gain as what we're seeing right now. And then they sort of flattened out and were really extended, kind of starting in the 90s and 2000s. Just kind of curious to understand why that difference.
Well, people have studied that for a long time, but that's when we went into what we call the jobless recoveries. People have hypothesized why that happened. Did technology create the output over time and workers were replaced or whatever, but it took a much longer time to get the employment back up. And that has been pretty consistent since the time you highlighted, all the way up through the 2008 recession. All of those were much longer, roads. The 2008 by far the worst because it was a financial recession. So typical financial recessions take at least 5 years to recovery, and 6.5 is more the norm in terms of getting the jobs back. So this is particularly unusual because it's been so rapid, and we figured out that if you hand out $6 trillion and people spend it, actually it creates a lot of jobs. Again, I don't want to make any political statements. It's also created a lot of inflation. I'll just say that. But it got people back working. It got employment back up. So when you look at the picture, that's the story. It's different now than it was before.
Okay, thank you. And then I can't remember who had mentioned this. You mentioned the relationship between population growth and economic growth. So how dependent are we as a city on population growth in relation to our overall revenues?
I don't really have a concrete answer to that because, well, I guess, I didn't have population growth for the city of Westminster, or I suppose what we have is really counties, Adams and Jefferson County. But I couldn't pin down any relationship between population growth in the counties and the economic variables. And I suppose that could be because there's not been a lot of variation in population growth, so I can't really tease out exactly what that relationship is.
So go back to the core of your question. U.S. GDP is damped over the long run right now by slower population growth. So it's going to be very hard for the U.S. to grow over, 2% a year because population growth is so small. You can sort of bring that down to the state level. If the state was to grow at the national level, we'd have lower Colorado GDP growth. The state has benefited from having higher population growth. We've been a top 10, usually 6 or 7 in terms of population growth. So that's been part of the engine of the state having stronger economic growth has been our population growth has been stronger. So to the extent we slip in that category or fall, and I shouldn't make it such a subjective statement, however you want to think about it, but slower population growth, some people I'm sure will feel great about that, right? But in the process of doing that, it also dampens your economic growth possibilities.
And those population variables are more significant at the state. If you look at the overall population, migration, birth rates, the prime working age population, the older age, the dependency ratio. So those are all variables that come in at the state level. But as Robert said, population doesn't fluctuate as much at a very local level. So we don't have that as a significant variable.
On slide 11, sorry guys, just want to understand this.
Well, they're not numbered. So.
Oh, they're on the, sorry. On
Sales
the
tax
sales
collections,
tax
got it.
collections.
Yes.
You had all of these different variables that were listed on the right. Is there some, and you said just, they kind of, as you adjust one, it impacts the other, or what have you. Is there some, not to go into ad nauseum right now, but is there some place where you sort of describe the relationship of these to one another?
We don't have all of these statistically teased out, but we observed these factors as we were looking around Colorado during the recession. So early on, the tourism communities were hit harder because the tourists went away as the ski resorts and other amenities were shut down. And now we observe that in Denver as the tourism economy hasn't come back up in the mountain region. So, it was more anecdotally as we've worked with communities around Colorado. What are some of the factors that are helping drive or causing them to lag, especially in their sales tax recoveries? Another anecdote is Castle Rock really outperformed during the pandemic. They're a somewhat of an isolated center of commerce in southern Douglas County. They have a lot of outdoor malls with the outlet malls, so people could still, when people weren't going into places like Park Meadows, they were still visiting outdoor shopping centers like the outlet malls in Castle Rock. So contrast Castle Rock with Lone Tree. Lone Tree was a community that was hit abnormally hard compared to other communities in the Denver metro region. So you can kind of see the major driver of a place like Park Meadows versus outlet malls in Castle Rock and how they performed. And also Castle Rock has mostly out commuters during normal times. It's somewhat a bedroom community and people are driving out for work. During the pandemic, they stayed home. They spent money in their home community. And so we can relate those examples across many communities in Colorado, even Boulder, experiencing the downturn in student enrollment, or these students living and going to school in Boulder, the tourism economy pulling back a little bit in Boulder, the lack of in-commuters to Boulder. So there's a number of examples. That's why we put those on the slide here, is because there's these different factors.
And the lack of big box retail.
Yeah.
Main Street retail versus big box retail. So I was alluding to that early on, working with all these different cities, you get all these different relationships and you see what worked and what didn't work in this kind of an economic downturn. We had, I don't know that we've updated it recently. We had a similar slide to the county slide that's in your deck with cities, with like 40 cities on it. And you could sort of see and that's how we were describing that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll also add that by modeling these different revenue components, like restaurant sales and grocery store sales and online sales, so we capture some of those differences that Brian was describing.
That's true. Yeah.
Last question on slide 16, which is Colorado economy. So basically you anticipate sort of a slowdown in 2023, but I'm just observing much more optimism after that. Is there just any description as to kind of why that jumped back up? Because I'm seeing we're going down 1.1% in employment, and I'm assuming that's job numbers. And then the unemployment rate is increasing. So that isn't as great in 23, but it looks like there's more optimism for 24. And I was just kind of curious why.
Yeah, I think the news stories that we're all hearing these days about, for example, the Fed's actions and the impact that's having on the housing market, and a lot of these effects are going to persist or even worsen into 2023, and then with the geopolitical situation in turmoil, that's going to continue to weigh on the economy. And so the expectation, though, is that those factors, I mean, particularly the impact of Fed policy, is going to have run its course by the time we're in late 2023. So moving into 2024, things should be putting us back on a much more normal path. And so when I look at those numbers from 2024 on to 27, it looks like a return to normality is what I see. We hope.
The dot plot slide I showed you is slide 7. You can see the Federal Reserve rates are, at least in the dot plot, are coming down in 2024. So I think there's a concept there that there's going to be monetary stimulus just to try to pull the economy forward. So that's sort of built into the 2024 and beyond forecast that's coming from Moody's. Right.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this presentation. It's really lovely to have experts like you guys in the room.
We appreciate your questions.
Councilor Baker.
Yeah, on the Fed's fund rate outlook, basically what I'm understanding from this is that we're going to be paying 2 to 2.5% more interest on any money we borrow, as versus money borrowed in December to money borrowed today.
Or last December to money borrowed today. So we're already, yes.
We're already up 2.25%. They've had 4 rate increases.
And you were saying there's another one anticipated at 3/4?
I think they think there's going to be 75 more basis points this year at a minimum.
So that'd be up 3%. Yikes. A lot of interest.
Yes.
Anyone else? Thank you so much. It was very helpful.
Hold on. I'm going to ask our policy and budget manager, John Presner, to come up and hit the next section of slides that are in your slide deck.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Stay in case there are any residual questions after this. Thank you. And so what I'm here to talk about is really what does this mean for the city in terms of this specifically, what it means for 2022 year end, and also 2023 as we're building our budget, because sales tax is about 65% of our general fund budget. So it's a significant portion of our revenue. So all of these changes really impact on what the city is able to do in terms of operations and capital financing. So you have the full slide deck in front of you, but in the interest of time, we're going to jump ahead. So if we can move to kind of the meat of the presentation to slide 6 of this presentation, please.
And don't feel rushed. Whatever we need to know, it's okay.
We can always go back. So actually the one slide previous to this. Yes, thank you. So these are real dollars and what these different scenarios mean. So as we discussed, we have 3 different scenarios that we model or we receive, the pessimistic, the baseline, and the optimistic. We've used the baseline model for our 2022 budget, and we're recommending moving forward with that. Should we choose to perform a different or use a different model, these are the different scenarios and what they mean. So our 2022 budget in terms of sales and use tax for this year is 111 million. If we use our baseline, we're coming in just shy of 7 million in excess of that. So if we choose a more optimistic model, we'll have a little bit, I mean, we'll have what we have, but this is as far as the projection goes. But for 2023, it really does impact on what the city is able to plan for in terms of, like I said, operations and capital. So the baseline is about a 2.5% increase over 2022, still a very significant increase over our 2022 budget. So still very good news of a $10 million increase in sales tax. Yes.
And maybe you'll get to this. I briefly went through this, so I'm not sure, but I have to ask, how does that in terms of how far our dollars go though with inflation? So if we go up $2 million, but it's that costing us another 4, where are we actually really landing?
The same question.
That's something that we're going to definitely demonstrate in our operating budget as we discuss and capital as far as obviously asphalt prices and concrete, we're just not able to do as much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So for like Chris mentioned at the start of the presentation, we really want to get to kind of 2 decision points at this meeting. One is on what basis do we build our 2023 budget? We recommend using the baseline approach of 121 million, but certainly we can choose a more pessimistic model or a more optimistic model.
I'm Gen X, so cynicism is my middle name. So the pessimistic to me seems, sorry, what it is. I don't know. I just to be conservative.
I'm going to agree with you. I like being conservative, so I think that we probably do ourselves justice by planning for that, and then if we end up with carryover, go after other stuff.
Anyone else? Councilor Baker?
Just to make sure I understand the information correctly, the baseline in 2021 was $90 million?
So that slide is a scorecard. So the projections that we get are only on the 3%. Sales tax number does not include the 0.6% on public safety. And then we have other revenue as well for sales tax as far as audits go, refunds, and things like that.
So you're saying that the stuff on page 5 and page 6 are not the same number?
It's not an apples to apples. We had
so how much did we spend in 2021?
We received 110 million.
How much should we spend? That's the question.
Spend on, I'm not sure.
So in 2021, well, what was the budget in 2021? And I'm trying to compare apples to apples. So that 5 and 6 are terribly confusing.
Our sales and use tax budget in 2021 was 100 million.
100 million. So we spent 11% more in 2022. Or we budgeted 11% more.
It was 100 million in 2021, and in 2022 was 111 million. I'm sorry, that was the 2021 years again. So the 2021 actuals.
Well, no, what was the baseline projection?
94 million, or sorry, 91 million.
No. I want them to include the same family as this page includes.
So we did not have, I don't believe we had projections.
Oh, I'm sure we have projections. Come on.
So we budgeted 91 million for the total sales and use tax
So we were very
fund. And then we had 100 million that came in.
And then for 2022, we went 111 million or 112 million, and we're actually running at 118, right?
Correct.
Gotcha. So I'd like to advocate that we make the 2023 budget as $112 million, which would be no increase from 2022 to 2023, but from 2021 to 2023, it'd be a significant increase.
Well, I have a question on that. Because I see your train of thought, but I want to be fair to the fact that budget was conservative over those years because of COVID and we knew the impact of it, and we kind of saw some roller coaster throughout the different waves of COVID. So those numbers, or the 112 that we budgeted, took into account those factors, right? I mean, we kind of budgeted low and tight. And the reason it's important for me to understand that if we do, like you're advocating, what gets dropped out of the budget, because there were things that definitely got dropped from the priorities because we knew we weren't sure how revenues were going to do. We ended up doing a lot better than we had anticipated we could do. However, I know for sure that we dropped stuff out of priority both of those years, right? So, yeah. Well, there's one example, and we've added some priorities to increase core services. So I don't want to under budget and not be able to do the core services that we put in our strategic plan in at an increased rate.
Also, what was the last carryover that we just did? What was
$24 million.
And I know how much you hate carryover.
No, but carryover adds to the pot of money we can spend.
Right, but I mean, for correct budgeting, it would be, and then I understand part of carryover is uncompleted projects as well. So, but it is also found dollars. Well,
right.
So I would like us to have a number, that is close to, or use a number that is closer to what our true projection is. And it looks like our experts are telling us 117 million is pessimistic. So 117.7, I think, is a reasonable projection to use.
Do we want to budget to spend every nickel we take in?
We should budget.
I don't want to budget for every nickel we
Spending on core services, sure.
We're gonna do
Then
refund it?
Yeah, you're gonna carry over.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad. I wouldn't mind refunding it, like a Tabor type refund.
Right.
I wouldn't mind lowering taxes on some. I wouldn't mind having a sales tax holiday from some days. I think there's all different ways we can use it to give it back to the people, because
But
we're doing pretty well, aren't we?
No, we are not. Dollar wise, we are, but we are not meeting the needs of our citizens right now because of employee shortages. How are we going to fill that gap? The emails that we get day in and day out about services that we have not been able to provide this summer are some of those critical
And
things.
it's going up in 2023.
Or road condition.
And that's what I'm saying too, is our citizens in the survey talked a little bit about that too. And so we should use a budget based on the dollars that we're in. And then we assign strategically based on our plan, those most important dollars. But, we've got the dollars, then we put them into the
It
budget.
is really difficult to have this conversation without having the historical apples to apples of what we've been
I'm
doing.
sure we'll get more of that on Saturday, right? I mean, or no? Because that could be a juncture as far as part of our discussion.
Well, the other thing that I'm concerned about, Counselor Baker, going into this is because I don't disagree. I don't want to overtaking people's money that we don't need. I just think that we have needs that are reasonable, that are within the responsibility of the council and the city government. But the other thing that concerns me is the projections of what happens in following years if those, the revenues really do decrease at a even more rapid rate and inflation continues to go up. That's going to make it harder for us to do services. And one of the ways that we were able to fare through COVID as well as we did is we did tap our reserves. So I don't know I can't recall. But I don't recall where we're at. Are we back to pre-COVID reserves?
Yes.
Ryan, hey, could I switch with you
Sure,
for just
you
a
bet.
minute? That'd be helpful. I'll probably be come in and talk a little bit here.
Yes.
I've just been letting this evolve a little bit, but thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, all of the general reserves and the revenue stabilization reserves have been refilled, retopped up from post-COVID, a lot of conservative outlook. And, I just want to comment on this. The point of this particular slide, tonight's discussion, is to have the mayor and council come to direction for staff on what is a reasonable forecast for income only. Over the weekend, you'll make many choices about whether or not to refund that income, spend on core services, or other things. Those are spending choices. This is merely an income projection. That's all this slide and this discussion. We're trying to orient the community and the mayor and council to the income projection for our city. We're trending right now to collect this year more than $118,395, the baseline. If we just straight lined it this year, we would collect more than 118. But the brightest minds in economics in the state of Colorado are saying we're probably anticipating a cooling off here in the fourth quarter. So 118,395 is a pretty good projection of income. And then a 2.5% increase for 2023 is what these folks are predicting for 2023 being their highest confidence baseline projection going forward. What our staff will then do with your feedback and direction is build forward a budget that we'll describe to you over this coming weekend. We now have an agreement on how much income will come to the city. Then, as the various voices around the table have described, there will be choices made about how or if to spend those funds.
But I'm not saying this is approved, but to be a little more blunt, you're saying we're just agreeing that this is what we think will come in. And then afterwards, we get to decide, do we want to give a refund to the citizens, spend it on roads or whatever?
There you are. This is a key variable in your budget planning as a council, because whichever column we're directed to carry forward here will drive your ability to choose in how to meet your strategic plan goals or make tax refunds or whatever the case may be. The other key variable that our economists here will advise on are the wage costs. And that goes to what you had brought up, Mayor Pro Tem. We may have an increase, in revenue from your earlier numbers, but we may end up having to spend that on wage costs, fuel costs, all of those kinds of things. That's for later as well. But we also want to build a budget on what we think wage increases might be, and they're going to be a lot higher, than we've ever seen, just because of what's happening with inflation. So, the feedback that we'd like to receive is, again, we're trending right now to collect more than 118,395, but we think there'll be a little bit of a cooling off happening, and then some moderate growth next year. So, our staff team is recommending the baseline projections for your budget planning for the coming weekend. But of course, I know there'll be optimistic, pessimistic, etc. feelings, but we just want to focus on the income right now.
Councilor Zadi, where are you at?
I think with the state of the economy and the variables and not seeing the expense side and that wage cost is significant, it's got to be baseline in my opinion, because that gives us more flexibility in the future to then do what we want to do. But if we preemptively hinder ourselves, then we won't have as much flexibility.
Councilor Emmons?
I'm a realist, so I go pessimistic.
Okay. And Councilor Baker, I have you for 112,000, a totally different number.
Well, given the thing about what we expect, no, I'd go with the baseline. Because that's where the trend is going. And if it's just for how much we're going to take in, that's a reasonably logically based number.
You have 4 people saying pessimistic.
Although I could be talked into baseline, so.
I will say in the last few years, we have taken a ground closer to the pessimistic. And then we've had what you see here in 2022. We were sitting in these chairs a year ago and agreed on a budget of 111,931. Now you can see we're trending closer to 118. We've been very cautious as a city. And so our recommendation is with baseline is probably a little bit more toward what we might actually receive. So some food for thought.
Yeah, but how many times did they put money in since those predictions? That's probably not going to happen again. I hope not. But I mean, that's got to be taken into account, I would think.
I hear people wanting to hear you deal with everything every day, and you most of the time make a penny into a quarter. And so I think you need to present to us honestly what you're thinking, and you've heard this discussion. So maybe it's some place between pessimistic and baseline this time. Maybe you cut the baby in half and add 2 million and take 2 million. I don't know, but you know the budget, and so bring it forth on Saturday.
Okay, we'll, based on this discussion, we'll get some additional input from our economics team here and move forward with a recommendation for the weekend that'll help you make choices as you move through your strategic plan and the spending side of the ledger. So John, why don't we move forward to what we think might happen in wages? You know, these are some big variables. This is the potential income to the city, but we want another main variable is a forecast in a base budget that we'd like to present to you for over the weekend that includes wage cost escalation in the marketplace. Now, 2 parts of that we know about. We have collective bargaining agreements for our that you're aware of, and then we have our general employees, and we need to be thinking about a wage cost escalation there. We've talked to our economists about what we see happening there, and we have a number that we'd like to recommend. John, could you call out the slide? And
Can you
we'll
go next
pull that
slide,
up?
please? So the table on the right there is taken directly from the last presentation on projections. And you'll see in 2023, consumer prices are projected to increase 5.7%. So based on that inflationary number, we're recommending a pay increase of 5.5% for employees outside of those 2 CBAs mentioned earlier. And those costs there indicate what that projected cost is for a full year for those three wage increases. Yes.
Did we do anything for the 8.6% inflation?
Wasn't that an estimate?
Those are for 2022. So we're talking about a wage cost increase for 2023. We want to highlight that, but the point is you can really see the trend of what's happening in personal income growth and consumer prices, real major inputs for 2023. Ordinarily, we would be able to reach out to our neighbors across our 2 counties and say, hey, what are you guys planning for wage increases for next year? But it's a very dynamic environment. So we've engaged some other inputs and think for us to remain competitive in attracting and retaining employees, we think the market for 2023 will be 5.5%. We'd like to build a base budget for you this weekend based on that, so you can kind of see what that does to your available spending. Of course, we'll continue to monitor this throughout the course of the year, and we'll have some real firm numbers later in the year of what our neighboring cities may or may not do. And we may make adjustments, based on what we learn. But this is sort of conservative in the opposite direction, which is building in funds to be competitive in the market.
Sorry, 2 questions. One, the personal income column is income growth.
Personal income and maybe we can have a little description of that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's the rate of growth, annual rate of growth of personal income year over year.
Must have missed that vote. Okay. So then the second question I have is more about how we apply the income increase. So I'm curious just to think about, is it varied in terms of how, what level of income people are at? So it could be more impactful for our lower income employees to get something slightly higher, and then our top tier income employees to not have something as high.
Well, in surveying the market, we do a number of things. We'll be able to go into more detail over the weekend, but we do a benchmarking process that compares certain groups of workers, skill, education, et cetera, complexity of the job to those out in the marketplace. So, that we're looking at not just what the income level of the given employee is, but what's the market for somebody in information technology or accounting, engineering, law enforcement, et cetera, whatever the particular trade or skill might be. So we're looking at those groups of folks first in what's happening in that segment of the market, and then what's happening in general. And that's why we're recommending this 3.5 million or a 5.5% cost increase so that we can have the flexibility to look at all of those. We will have some employees who are maybe further or more higher paid in the market. So they're at a competitive wage, and others that are lagging. And we want to get those caught up so that we can be sure and attract and retain folks in those particular trades. So it's a mix, Counselor, to answer your question. It's not necessarily based on raises allocated to any particular salary strata. It's just purely market.
I get the market piece, but I also think about just the buying power of our employees that are probably a lot more strapped the less they make. Transportation costs increasing by like 40%. All of these, and housing costs being so high. Just to be thinking about that tier as well and how that might impact how you distribute.
Anything else you need from us?
I think we have good direction. Thank you, Mayor and councilors, and thank you to our guests for providing some context on the state of the economy in Westminster and beyond. And so thank you. We will now rough out first draft for you for this coming weekend, where you'll see those base expenses, wage growth, you'll see a revenue forecast based on some of our discussion, and then you'll be able to make decisions related to capital and other operating activities for the city. So see you there.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Real quick, I just want to ask in terms of, maybe you have it in there, but I think we should at least know that I'm going to be asking about it. Like some of the programs I've seen neighboring municipalities do around attracting law enforcement, and I shared with most of the council. I saw a commercial for what Arvada is doing, and so they're doing like some college tuition type program on top of like bonuses for signing and things like that. So I don't know if there's some opportunity for us to look at that, because if our neighboring municipalities are doing that, that means that's what it's going to take to be competitive in those job markets. So I want to make sure that we're thinking about that in the budget process.
Appreciate that. We'll look forward to it. And it's one of the reasons we're doing this in early August as opposed to maybe later in the summer, so we can get some of that feedback and then understand what's happening in the market and make those adjustments as needed. So we'll do.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need a break? Okay. Need a break before Parks and Rec comes up. Are you done with your presentation?
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure. Okay. I have these other things and I'm going, oh no, we cut you off. So sorry.
No, so I have no idea.
We're live. We're ready to go? How many?
Yes, Mayor, City Council, I'm going to ask Mr. Chris Lindsay again to open up.
Yoo-hoo. We have a meeting.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Mr. Chris Lindsay again to open up this presentation, joined by Tomas Mishler to carry us through the evening. And it's a fairly brief presentation relative to the one you just saw, so we can get through it. And I've mentioned you have the last slide printed out. You can take notes on that, and it should help with the discussion following the presentation. Okay, Chris.
Can we make recommendations before we see it?
Sure.
No.
I just told him after reading everything, the irrigation has to be first because we don't have beautiful anything if we don't have the irrigation.
I'm doing, what are we looking for? Just more of these. Oh, yeah, I got there's a whole. Here, I'll take that stack. Give me that one. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Why don't we hop on to the next slide? So in November of 2021, Westminster residents approved Ballot Issue 3N, extending the current tax that benefits the city's parks, open space, recreation, and trails. The approved ballot measure states that the funds are to be dedicated to, quote, protecting our water quality by conserving natural areas along creeks, protecting, acquiring, improving, repairing, and maintaining all city parks, trails, wildlife habitat, open space, recreational facilities, and other facilities, and or providing more active recreational opportunities for children, youth, adults, and seniors. Next slide, please. Voters of the city authorized up to $15 million and increased debt with a total repayment cost of $20.2 million. Since the time at which this language was drafted, and now interest rates have gone up rather dramatically, as we just talked about quite a bit. Each 1% of increased interest decreases the amount of money we can use for these projects by about $1 million. We've got some folks here that can speak to that this evening. City Council directs us to proceed. We hope to close around the end of August with projected funding of approximately $13.5 million to be expended over the next few years. And we've provided a range for you also, just because interest rates are changing. We also just discussed. So between $12.5 and $13.5 million. Next slide, please. So staff has been looking at the option of a private placement loan offering. This has proven to be a cost-effective approach, especially given what is going on with interest rates. We used this approach most recently for the golf course irrigation projects, which are underway. Next week's City Council agenda will be a request from the Finance Department to authorize bond counsel for this issuance. It's important to note that as we move forward for these projects, we're going to talk about these, and we also need to talk a little bit about project management capacity within PRNL to manage these projects. Staff has identified nine potential projects, with capital costs ranging from an estimated $24 million at the low end to an estimated almost $36 million at the upper end. We feel that these projects fit the ballot criteria and promote a shared sense of community, providing a wide range of amenities, activities for our residents, businesses, and visitors. These projects specifically benefit the city's parks, open space trails, and recreational resources, as well as follow the 2022 strategic plan. At this point in the presentation, I'm going to turn things over to Director Tomas Herrera-Mischler, who will be presenting an overview of each of these proposed projects with a range of costs. This evening, we're looking for guidance on prioritizing these projects as we move forward toward issuance of debt, which again, first off, includes that authorization for bond counsel.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and councilors. Been looking forward to this opportunity to present these projects to you. If I could have the next slide, please. So over the last 50 years, the city's acquired or built 63 parks, including our 205-acre crown jewel of City Park. We've got 2 championship golf courses, 120 miles of trails, and we've preserved over 3,700 acres of open space. As of 2019, the parks and open space system encompassed 38% of the city's land area. It dramatically shapes the visual character of our city, the quality of life, and even the identity of Westminster. So as the city approaches build out, we have relatively limited opportunities to acquire additional land. So in order to achieve City Council's strategic objective to ensure access to the city's parks, open space, trails, libraries, and recreation centers, the future acquisitions for property will focus on areas identified as opportunities to provide better access and expand connections to our existing parks and open spaces. Of course, we'll also look for where we can complete missing links in our trail system, both the local and the regional trails, and always looking to enhance our existing parks and open space. So the property acquisitions will be guided by the recommendations that are going to be defined in our new Parks and Open Space Acquisition Plan and a new Trail Master Plan. The RFP has already been issued for the acquisition plan. We currently have $1 million budgeted within the 2022 CIP budget, and we'll utilize that for matching grants and other funding opportunities that exist with add-on programs. Next slide, please. So the England Park Corridor connects the heart of historic Westminster to Westminster Station and Park along the Little Dry Creek Trail, and it enables a lot of access to new recreational opportunities for this part of our community. This project will enhance the visual and environmental quality of the community, and it creates neighborhood green spaces, a themed playground, and it provides an improved and much more accessible pedestrian experience. The project will rejuvenate the area north of 72nd Avenue by connecting to an existing and expanding an existing community garden. The corridor creates better neighborhood connections by enhanced trail and pedestrian access to the Bowles House Museum, the parking lot for the softball fields that Westminster High School uses, and to the dog park, and then connects to the new adventure playground. Staff's also looking to improve the beautiful fire training tower site, and it's, I'm being facetious, and all that ocean of concrete around it in partnership with the fire department. We currently have $513,000 appropriated within the city's CIP and a Great Outdoors Colorado Generation Wild Grant. Next slide. So our recreation facilities are between 22 and 50 years old, and they need some reinvestment in order to assure that we can continue to operate them efficiently and meet the community's expectations. Funding would address both aging infrastructure and enhance the overall visitor experience in a variety of facilities throughout the city. One of those facilities is the Westminster Sports Center, which is pictured in the middle, and it needs improvement to the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. Well, actually, it doesn't have air conditioning. It's got a inefficient heating system. I think that's the polite term for it. And it doesn't have any air conditioning for the activities that a lot of activities that we hold there in the summertime. So that's our COT program there in the middle, very popular with the little ones. Work will also focus in historic Westminster. It's a project to provide, excuse me, overall ADA and guest service improvements they're currently being designed and fit. A total of $3 million is available for this project from city CIP funds and matching funds from Adams County Open Space Grant. This project will relocate the building entrance to provide much better access and security. And it also includes the installation of an elevator to provide access to all 3 floors within the facility, as well as improvements to the function and security of the lobby, program space, and wellness areas. The project will provide an upgraded cardio and fitness area, relocate offices, and renovate community meeting rooms. So quite the overhaul for that facility. And then the MAC, and it's the associated gymnastics space currently occupied by Highland Hills. It's proposed to be modestly improved to allow for continued use shortly after the gymnastics program is relocated next year. We do have a feasibility study that's already funded for locating a black box theater in this space, and that study will begin soon. The costs for the theater have not been identified, and so they're not included in this project list. Additional facility projects could help increase potential revenue, such as improvements to the exterior rental spaces at Westview and City Park, should funding permit. Next slide. So downtown residential and commercial development is continuing to progress quickly in downtown, and the master plan calls for a new park as an amenity in the heart of downtown. The design for Center Park, it includes iconic structures that are inspired by and pay tribute to the balloons that once were featured in Westminster Mall. The park is intended to serve as an outdoor living room for our downtown, as well as a visual asset for the surrounding office towers being built to the north and to the south of Center Park. These office towers are expected to break ground this fall and will be completed in the next 3 to 4 years. The park's intended to provide our workers, residents, and visitors easy access to an attractive contemporary public landscape. The park design features multi-use spaces, including a center green with smaller, what I call outdoor rooms along the perimeter of the park. So the outer park areas are going to be matched to the surrounding uses, and it'll include things like a dog run, shaded sitting areas, restrooms, and a variety of other uses. A lot of these smaller landscape rooms are multifunctional, and they're designed to accommodate year-round activities and events. Current funding sources have been building up over the last few years, and along with some redirected funds from the future East Park. Debt revenue could provide the gap funding needed to complete this project.
Is it redesigned
Yes.
in-house or?
No, we're working with one of our landscape architect consultants.
Who is it?
I don't remember the name of the firm right now, but I can get that to you.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide, please. Oh, so the Promenade, it's a super important community asset, but unfortunately it hasn't aged well, and it definitely needs to be refreshed in order to meet the stakeholder needs and neighborhood expectations. So right now, the Promenade outdoor space, it's dedicated mostly to water features, and the upper pond has been leaking a significant amount of water, and it had been abandoned. The lower pond is filled with potable water, and the evaporation rate in the lower pond costs the city $100,000 in supplemental water every year. Some of the promenade trees are missing, and they're not easily replaced because of irrigation issues. There's no area for dogs or a playground for family use and hotel guests. So the plan is for a major restoration and an upgrade with stakeholders involved throughout the design process, which is currently underway. The proposal is to renovate the outdoor space and remove the tiered ponds. The space will be reused to create an attractive public landscape that will enhance the neighborhood experience, providing flexible green space for relaxation and recreational programming and entertainment. The upper pond and the horse statue area and part of the plaza is proposed to be reused as a new multi-level playground. New turf areas and sidewalks will create opportunities for strolling and dog walking. And an important consideration is to continue to have good views from the hotel rooms and enhance the setting of the hotel's events building and the neighboring live workspaces and the ice center. Next slide, please. So you've, I'm sure, heard a lot about Westminster Station. Really, Westminster Station Park's a 40-acre parcel. It's located along Little Dry Creek between Lowell and Federal. And this funding would allow us to complete the next phase of development for the park. Projects combine park and regional stormwater detention facility, and it supports the Westminster Rail Station located on the adjacent RTD B line. 2016. So the project is a multi-phased overhaul of a previously neglected river corridor with the first phase already completed. The floodplain definitely limits some of the opportunities, but there's still a lot of potential uses that could be developed. Adding another outdoor special event space, shade pavilions, which would be very useful out there, fishing pier, another restroom, xeric garden, and possibly iconic public art. Next slide, please. So our park system has 63 parks, and most of them were built in the 80s and 90s. The newest irrigation system that we have was installed 13 years ago across the street at Westminster Center Park. A lot of our parks, the majority of our parks irrigation systems range in age from 25 to 40 years old. And so they break down a lot. We saw sort of in multiple parks and even City Hall's turf this spring. And the repairs continue to increase every year. Additionally, some of our pumping systems and backflow sizes don't always match the amount of turf that we need to water at many of our parks. Of course, we're looking carefully at where we can reduce the amount of turf without decreasing the recreational value of the park, of each park. Funding this project would allow us to install more water efficient and better designed modern irrigation systems. You can see on the map where the parks are that we recommend for new irrigation systems, which are located throughout the city. We estimated the costs on $50,000 an acre. So replacing and renovating this outdated infrastructure helps us to retain playable recreation fields, green parks, and trees in optimum condition while better conserving limited water resources. Next slide, please.
I just ask real quick, where is Park 1200?
Say that again.
Where is Park 1200?
Really 116th and Pecos. It was the one that was supposed to pay for itself.
Okay.
Thank you.
So a new nature center is needed to accommodate nature education programs, interpretive resources, and special event meeting space at Stanley Lake Regional Park. Other enhancements we're considering venues, nature play, a cafe, office, and restrooms. If this project is selected, this would provide initial funding for the planning, design, and implementation of the first phase of what would be a multi-phase project. The new nature center would be located near the existing nature/visitors/administration building, shown in the photo on the screen, which would be converted into a staff operations center. If any of you have been in there recently, you'll see that we've divided up the kitchen into little working cubicles. It's really substandard. Little editorial comment. Next slide, please. Mckay Lake, we're currently working to finalize plans for reconstructing and improving the community access on the north shore of Mckay Lake. Priorities include rebuilding the trail to reduce flooding impacts, one of our biggest complaints for that park, and to assure its usability year-round, bringing the trailhead and the associated trails into ADA compliance, installing restroom facilities, and improving and expanding the parking lot on 144th Avenue. Project will also provide some educational and interpretive signage and better shoreline access. This project has a $40,000 grant to help support the planning phase, which is currently underway. Last slide, please.
May I interrupt for just a moment, Tomas? Councilor Namella, the answer to your question is Sasaki is the architect that did the work on the downtown park.
They're redoing it.
So Sasaki did the original plan. We're now working with one of our on-call landscape architects to develop plan further. So
That's disappointing to hear, but okay. I would like to know who. 'Cause I'm a consultant snob. so-
DTJ.
Oh, really?
DTJ.
Yeah, we pulled them off of one of them. Designs years ago. Subpar, so.
DTJ has been doing a great job on this project. It's been, the stakeholders have been really excited to work with them. There's some, the original design from the Sasaki sort of core inspiration for some of the forms in this next iteration, but then they've taken it into a much more usable design that we can implement. So thanks so much for this opportunity to present these capital projects for your consideration. We're seeking direction from City Council on this list of debt project options in order to identify how to best move ahead. It's clear that the capital projects identified in this presentation far exceed the funding available through post-debt financing. So by prioritizing this project list, you'll help us focus our efforts over the next 3 years, during which the funds should be used. Be happy to take any questions at this point.
Sure. Just, okay. So regarding, for example, England Park and its visitorship, or how many people, do we have any numbers on park visits that can help give us, because I'm looking at, for example, the impact England Park improvements would have versus Mckay Lake. I run around Mckay Lake. There's, some people from Broomfield, some people, so it's not as much of an impact, I think, versus number of community members that might be impacted by improvements to England Park. Do we have any numbers like that?
No, we don't have specific visitation numbers, but certainly if you look at the density of the population surrounding different parks, it gives you a sense of how many people can walk to that park in a 10-minute walk. And certainly England Park is a much more densely populated area than up near Mckay Lake.
Okay. And then I'm just curious, does staff have?
Say that again?
Does staff have a recommendation?
I would be, all of these projects are really great. Every single one of them would be a really great addition to our park system. I will say that staff unanimously feels that the improvements to the irrigation systems is just vitally important. The mayor's giving a thumbs up.
That's my number one. I ranked the top 6.
So with respect to the irrigation one, I've seen comments about the Big Dry Creek Park, and it plays a key role in serving for soccer fields for a lot of teams versus Park 1200, which I think like some squirrels hang out on. So I'm just, again, I'm just thinking about impact and where we're putting our money. And so I would probably be a little more sensitive to that park, especially versus others that we've heard are, impacting recreational activities that we have in the city. So that adjustment, I would appreciate being evaluated for that irrigation number.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilor Baker?
Yeah, have we talked to Broomfield about really helping us with Mckay Lake? They are the primary users of it.
We have not spoken with them as far as I know about that project, although they have been attending some of our community outreach. We know that some of the folks that come to our community outreach do live in Broomfield, but there hasn't been an official outreach to Broomfield.
Have we ever taken, like a census of the cars parking there? Because that parking lot is generally overflowed significant amount of the time.
Yes, that's why
probably seen that.
Yeah, the project includes expanding and improving the parking lot.
Well, I think if we did a census of the license plates, we'd know where the users live. Are there 2 Park 1200 parks? Because when I was on council, we approved Park 1200, and it was my understanding that was supposed to be a self-paying park. That the taxes they would tax themselves would pay for that park. So I was sort of surprised to see $175,000 for a sprinkler system. And Park 1200 was 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not familiar with that. Lance, are you familiar with that history?
Good evening, everyone. Lance Johnson, Parks Development Open Space Manager. There is a GID up at Park 1200. I am not aware of the current balance of that fund. I think there was talk that, yes, they would like to have that park been self-funded by that GID, but I don't think that will happen anytime soon. I think that's much, much further down the road now that the apartment complex is built out. There was a small balance in the GID 2 years ago that I believe we used to pay for some irrigation costs, just some water costs for that park. But outside of that, I don't know what the balance of the GID is this year.
Really, weren't they really supposed to build the park? Wasn't that part of the development agreement?
Well, I think there was a lot of different ideas and thoughts that went into that. I think eventually that was one of the ideas, was to just kind of gut the park and rebuild it. And then as it turned out, they just turned the park over to the city. And thus, that's why we set up the GID to at least have some type of fund to help manage some of the costs of the park since we took the park over. So there were conversations with others who are no longer at the city that were involved in those conversations that just kind of how that
So you're
transpired.
saying we got swindled?
I didn't say that.
Well, that's certainly the way I'd characterize it.
I think we have a nice park.
I
We have a
find
nice
that
park we can
outrageous,
invest in.
truly. Because the people at the ranch were livid about that being approved. Absolutely livid.
It's unfortunately a common thing with, handing over parks. When there's not clarity in recordation of who will be the long-term maintenance and operation of that.
Supposedly Park 1200, that was all well-defined.
I know, but if it's not recorded anywhere, I'm just saying it is happening in more than just Westminster. So it's unfortunate to hear that this also has occurred here.
We have that looked up and provided to council what was approved. I sat through all of those meetings, and so I am interested to see what was actually approved as part of that, because it was a pretty hot topic.
And can we talk to Broomfield, or really can we take a census about who's using Mckay Lake? I mean, we have partnerships with Broomfield in other areas, like that whole 160 down there by 120th and Federal.
And as the mayor said, Metzger Farm too, it'd be worth an outreach.
Doesn't hurt to ask.
Share.
They love their open space, and where there's the connection between the two cities, they've been very open. So I wouldn't be afraid to go and ask, talk to them.
Okay, and tell me what the difference between Westminster Station Park and England Park corridor is.
Westminster Station Park is the 40 acres that are immediately adjacent to the station. And then England Corridor stretches from the dog park up to 72nd Street and the Hmong Community Garden up there.
So it's separated by Lowell.
Yeah, Lowell is the dividing line there.
Okay. And who's going to be using those parks? Like, are we going to build parking at the Westminster Station Park?
So
because right now there's hardly any parking, and the railroad track serves as a barrier to anyone living in Westminster. There are 3 ways to get through: Lowell, the train station, and Federal. So walking or riding a bike is like all but out of the question.
It's a great bike trail.
I bike there always.
Right, and I'm saying, okay,
but there's a
biking is not out of the way. Are there many bike users?
Absolutely. It's like a highway.
Very, very popular.
Plus,
But the parking on the south side of it, where all the park amenities and the nature park, that parking lot is wide open.
Right.
And readily available.
With what they show, with all the apartments that are just on the other side of the greenhouse where this would touch, I mean, I just think it gives that part of the city some green space that they are begging for, some opportunities to have safe recreation, walking, biking, family walks, whatever it is in that area. I mean, it's badly needed down there. They don't have what we have in other parts of the city.
And we don't have any kind of depreciation schedule on our park irrigation system?
No, that's not that I'm aware of.
So the designers thought that build it and be done forever.
I doubt that they thought it'd be forever, but yeah, there's 20 years, 25 years out of an irrigation system, right, Lance? If you're lucky, and then you got to start thinking about replacing.
So they just kicked that can down the road.
Correct.
Well, doesn't that become part of our capital improvements? Like, don't we track that on any kind of capital improvements that we have?
No.
But on Saturday, we could start.
Yeah.
And do we actually have a list of the trail connections we want to buy? Because I keep hearing trail connections, but I've never heard of any examples.
Well, so one of the plans that we're working on in the next year is a trails master plan that would identify those specific connections and opportunities that are missing.
Okay, so
It
that,
needs to be
so I
updated.
mean, that fund, those monies, you just want us to put in a fund to hold.
For acquisition.
Those are all my questions.
Councilor Seymour?
I want to throw in my 2 cents for the irrigation update, dollars. And then also the England Park corridor, that area right now is wanting. And the open area north of the greenhouses looks terrible. And then it would then also make that along with the community garden into Bowles House to the parking lot there, which would also improve security for the Bowles House, as we all know. Well, many of us know it's had some security issues. So, yeah, I'm just throwing out, my top 2 or 3, and I think we need to have a serious discussion about the downtown center park as far as improvements to that. I have no problem with the other ones, but if we're ranking, those are my thoughts.
So you have 7, 2, and 4.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, Mayor Protem?
Seymour, are you feeling my notes?
I can't see that part.
7, 2, and 4. On irrigation, obviously, we have to take care of what we have. And I would like us, and we've brought this up in a couple different areas, from our water utility to now this. I do think it makes sense for us to think forward about, better defined roadmap, call it, for improvements, and when they might go off, so that we can better build out for our parks and stuff. So should be able to start planning. We know we get this money from our taxes, and when that drops off. Plus, that was one of the conversations when it sunsets and stuff, as far as the post-tax. So having that will help in the future if we ever go back out to the voters to extend that past what we did. England Park, very similar reasoning. If you remember back to a lot of what we heard in Uplands, a lot of it was the historic part of the community realized they would like some of those amenities as far as parks and open space. So I think that that's a great opportunity for us to improve for all the different reasons we've heard. And then if we're the downtown is rapidly going, so I think it makes sense for us to start looking at that park. I certainly have always been an advocate about the blooms, just because I grew up at that mall. So I'm glad to hear that idea is living on. I would also be an advocate for having some history plaques somewhere around, much like we do along 73rd Avenue. just so people understand.
In downtown?
Yeah,
Oh.
the history of,
Cool.
of that area. It's an opportunity, so.
Yeah, boy, if you didn't know, like me, you'd never guess it was a mall there, ever. I was amazed.
We're trying to figure out where Wards was, where I worked when I was 16, while we were drinking beer on Saturday.
Oh,
I
boy.
think we figured it out.
Main store or the automotive center?
We probably went between both of them.
Anybody else?
Just because I asked questions, but yeah, I would definitely prioritize the park irrigations number 7. Again, thinking about impact and visibility and use frequency. So adjustments there. Definitely the England Park corridor. I'm hoping that that park has a lot of community input.
Nicole Akineni was the lead on that, and massive amounts of community engagement were part of developing that plan. They actually developed a parents group that became extremely engaged in the planning part of this. So I can very confidently say that there's a lot of community input. And then going forward, developing the design, the more specific design and construction plans will include additional community engagement.
I love the idea, or I love the fact that we've gone out and we're actually going to deliver. And then, yes, I could, with the downtown center park, I do have a question about the rec facility improvements. It looks like, because you're saying, so additional estimated needs. So you currently have about 3 million. So I don't know if it's, I think those are important too, to keep those updated as well. So, and then I get, so putting some money towards that and then also some money towards the downtown center park. So I know there's 4 things on there and maybe things are towards the lower end as a result. But that's from it.
Yeah. Am I reading this correctly? Aren't items 3 and 4 funded?
Items 3, we have some funding in place for sure, $1 million towards and then we are estimating an additional 1.5 to 2.3 for completing the project fully.
So really, okay. And then 4, we already have $4 million, but you think it might go as much as $1 million more?
That is correct.
And then the mayor asked a great question. What are all our parks that we haven't completed? I saw the email about 4 parcels, but are there other parks that are incomplete?
I think there's definitely,
like neighborhood parks?
Yeah, there's definitely improvements that could be made to most of our parks throughout the whole city. And that's why we're going to be doing a master plan for the park system. We have promised to deliver it to you by December of 2024. So I believe that those kinds of improvements will emerge. These 4 parcels are specific areas where parks were planned and then they, for various reasons, never advanced.
And wasn't that one of the beefs that I think the park up Bradford actually had money paid to it in lieu of, and then it vanished, disappeared?
I don't know about that, Counselor.
Yeah, I think there were 2 parks, Bradburn and Walnut Grove. I believe both had PLD funds that were contributed to them in the ODP processes, and those funds just they did go someplace else. They didn't go back to developing any parks. I think that's happened previously. But yes, they did have PLD funds.
I would think that those things that we've should have higher priority lists than some of these.
I just asked that question because I know once public sees this, we're going to get asked that question with wherever they are.
And it's a really great question. And I know that we spent way too much time on the uplands trying to tie the money to the land that they were
just because of those
paid
reasons.
in lieu of. Just because of those previous things. And I would like to see those previous things on this list before. Well, maybe not the irrigation system. Yeah, you got to water the grass and trees, but a lot of the other ones, yeah.
I think that those 4 parcels in particular need to be studied and determined. Should they be parks? Should they be open space? And then that's certainly going to be addressed in the master plan. So we'll know, we'll have community input.
Except all this money will be gone, won't it?
The $13 million or $12.5 million will be gone.
I would appreciate seeing where the need is first.
Before, yeah.
Councilor Azadi?
I would agree. I would like to see a prioritized list of those redirected, of those parks that were never finished. And from this list though, as a secondary, so that's my primary, and then my secondary would be in order. I think it's 2, 7, 4, 6, and 3 if you want to be risky. Just throw, you want to throw something else in. That'd be my priority list.
Do you have any others?
Yeah, I mean, the park irrigation, I think you're hearing from council that seems to be a high priority, and I agree, it's across the city. One of the things that I heard campaigning was that there's no recreational facility on the northern end of Westminster. And not that I'm advocating for all these dollars to go to a facility, but I know that there's shared space with Highland Hills in, I think it's TrueFit on 120th and Zuni, but it's not necessarily like a city facility, right? So that is where I think we fall short on that northern part, on the northern end of our city. So I would like to see a little bit of recreational priority up there, up on the northern end, whether that be that we communicate with Broomfield on Mckay Lake. I think that that's prudent on doing that. But what I rated my top choices as is the park irrigation first, the England corridor second, the recreational facility improvements, and then I actually have Stanley Lake Nature Center on my list. And I have that for a variety of reasons. I think because based on what was proposed, it seemed like it could offer and generate a little bit of revenue for our city with activation of community in that area with food trucks and other activities that could happen. And so with the loss of boating, which I'm hoping to get back in the future, but if it were to ever come back, that would be a good activation space for more community aspects. So that's why I chose Stanley Lake.
My 6 are 7, 2. I put 1 as number 3 because I made the 6 million, so I'm thinking because we could maybe stretch that a little bit. And then my number 4 is 3, my number 5 is 9, and my number 6 is 5. What else do you need?
Wait, 7 and 2 have got a lot of support, don't they? We appreciate that. Yep. I wanted to just mention briefly that with regard to planning for the obsolescence of our parks and facilities, where facilities does a wonderful job of tracking that. They know exactly when everything is going to wear out, how much it's going to cost. They just do a great job. And so in order to take that same expertise and apply it to the rest of our park system, we have been mapping using GIS our resources. We have a really, really top-notch guy who works for InParks on that. And then he has 2 interns that are working hard on mapping our resources. So we're laying the foundation for then future asset management that we'll be able to then hopefully apply the same kind of wisdom that facilities does. Oh, that's been immensely helpful. Thank you very much.
If I may, maybe perhaps I could drive next steps. Chris, if you'd like to describe that in terms of what's coming up, but I'll do it just at a high level briefly. But first, thank you for these comments and general direction. It's been a steady 9 months since the vote. The council has some general consensus around this. The next step would be to initiate the borrowing. Our team has done some preliminary work over the last 30 days to get some indications of interest and some quotes and bids. We'd like to come back to you as soon as next Monday with a first reading borrowing ordinance. That will take some time to get closed and funded and all the details done. But it's evident that the council, we wouldn't assume just because the voters authorized borrowing that this city council would want to do that, but that's evident in your choices and direction here. So we'd like to come back as soon as your next meeting to start the borrowing process. It's a 2 reading ordinance. It'll take time to borrow the funds, get them in hand, interest rates, all of those different things. And then you still would have time as a city council, actually 3 years under the Internal Revenue Code to make all of the choices as to how to spend all of these dollars. And so we've also, Tomas very prudently has quoted for you here his team, low and high estimates. So we'll be working on these projects in the coming months and frankly years before the borrowing proceeds are spent. So if it's your direction, we would like to, obviously there's a little bit of timing of the essence. We want to offer that to the county next week to do that and adjust your agenda for next Monday.
Do I hear any objections to bringing it to council? Let's go.
Okay, we'll see you there.
Thank you.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun stuff.
Yeah, it was.
Not the magic word, dog run.
Dog run.
Downtown.
Yes.
Downtown. So many residents.
There's so many.
So many are like,
There's
give me the
way
dog
more
run. Give me the
dogs
dog
than
run.
people, I think.
We tried to do the streetscape design originally to accommodate the dog. We knew the dog population.
It's astounding.
It's still recording. Come on. It's 9:37 and this meeting is over.
When you told me you had a wonderful experience, that kind of just convinced.